everyone can see. Let me see if I want to see if I can.
We see the slide presentation, Celina.
Okay. Okay. So I can't see your faces at all. So I'm just going to talk to my screen and then I'll eventually stop sharing and then I can see you again. Okay. So I'm going to be speaking to you about the Reflection Room project and a case for developmental evaluation for community engaged research, which may be hopefully of interest to this group. So as mentioned, I work at the SE Research Center, and this is the Center of Excellence for Research at St. Elizabeth Healthcare, which some of you may be familiar with. It's a not-for-profit social enterprise, one of Canada's largest, and it's really focused on high-quality healthcare across the continuum of care. Our research center is an impact-oriented applied research center, so we're really trying to develop solutions to difficult problems that face Canadians related to their health. And we do this by partnering with what we call experts by experience. So people with lived experience, whether that be a patient or a client or a caregiver or a healthcare provider or health and social care provider. And we have these three areas that we focus on when we do our research. This project falls in the focus of dying, death, and grief. And that's where most of my research portfolio falls. That's my main interest. So the Reflection Room project at its core is an arts-based, unfacilitated installation that invites the reading and writing of stories in various settings, so in community and healthcare settings, for all sorts of different people to come and see this, the public, patients, clinicians, family caregivers. And at the root of it, it's really aimed to address some stigma around dying, death, and grief. And here on the screen, you can see three versions of the Reflection Room project. So it started out as a pilot, and then it adapted and became the art gallery version, and then COVID happened, and it was again pivoted to the most recent version, which is in the time of COVID-19 version. And that's what I'm really going to be speaking about with you today. So I'll give you an overview of what the Reflection Room is, and then I'll get into how we conceptualized the COVID version, how we evaluated it, and what outcomes we found. So through the three versions that you just saw on the screen, there was a sort of a framework that helped us conceptualize the project. And it was really based on three ideas: best practices in spiritual care, unfacilitated interventions, and storytelling. So at the very root, the whole project came about because of the work by Paul Holyoke and Barry Stevenson, who examined best practices of spiritual care at end of life. And four of these best practices you see on the screen. And the first one is about setting aside time for questions to emerge. The second one is about seeing and being seen in our joys, struggles, and questions. The third one is about paying attention to the qualities that make a space feel special. And the last one is about prescribed embodied acts. And these things support spiritual care at the end of life. And so when you start seeing pictures of the Reflection Room project, you might see how these ideas shape the conceptualization. So we can see the acts of witnessing is related to reading and writing stories or sharing stories. And the design of the Reflection Room space, there's quiet music, dim lighting, photographs of nature, things that create a special space that feels different than other spaces. The next idea that influenced this is participatory, unfacilitated community art. And on the screen here, you see pictures of the work by Candy Chang. And we know that a lot of interventions, particularly for grief, are structured group work or groups that people join. And so we came up, we thought, what would happen if something was totally unstructured, where people could go on their own time when they were ready and engage in their own way. So that helped shape like how we invite people into the reflection room. And the last one was a theory by Dr. Shanker and colleagues who came up with this model of storytelling for bereaved people. And they said that storytelling allows people to disclose emotions, process their thoughts, and form social connections. And this can improve mental health and well-being. So as a team, rooted in this sort of framework, we thought that bringing these three ideas together might support dialogue related to dying, death, and grief, and also some well-being and healing for those who need it. So I'm going to show you a quick video of the reflection room at the pilot stage. And I just want to give you an idea of what it might be like to enter a reflection room and also the type of things that people share. If you can't hear the audio, please somebody alert me.
All the deaths were terrible experiences, but all of them also taught me things which I am more than grateful to have learned. Patience, forgiveness, compassion. That first lonely summer following my husband's death, when it felt like I was also grieving the loss of myself, that the happy woman I always was had somehow died too, I would come to know a joy deeper and richer than I ever knew before.
Grief is a universal human experience, whether caused by dying and death or indeed through other forms of loss. But we usually don't think about grief and we don't talk about it much in our society. The Reflection Room offers the opportunity for storytelling to help people think about experiences surrounding grief and loss. You can come to a reflection room and read other people's stories. You can reflect on your own experiences with grief, and, if you wish, write your own story and add it to the reflection wall. By sharing stories, people will become more comfortable with expressing grief and loss. The Reflection Room has traveled extensively to public and community spaces all across Canada, and you can also read and share stories online.
Great. So that gives you some idea about what it might be like to be in a reflection room. And so once we came up with this sort of conceptualization of what the room was, we thought we need to evaluate it in some way. And originally we had thought we would do a mixed methods study. But very quickly we realized there were some challenges that we weren't sure about because there was some uncertainty about how the reflection was going to go. We wanted the settings in terms of where the reflection room was set up to be community driven. So we put the invitation out, who wants a room, and we were really willing to go anywhere. So there was uncertainty about the setting. It was open to the public, so we didn't know quite who the participants would be in a typical study-like format. The installation itself and the design, we wanted it to be iterative so that it could continue to develop as we learned more about what works and what doesn't work. And as I mentioned, we wanted engagement to be very flexible. We didn't want people to have to enter, read the stories, write a story. We didn't want it to be prescribed. And so we realized that a traditional type of evaluation where we did a formative evaluation and then a summative evaluation, so evaluating the process and then the outcomes, just wouldn't really work because there wasn't this set relationship between what we thought we were designing and what the outcomes would be. We needed something more exploratory and flexible and something that could evolve and innovate over time. So we landed on something called developmental evaluation, which is really about designing something and then learning about what you've designed and allowing it to innovate and evolve over time. What happens in a developmental evaluation, there's still a rigor to the process, but it's not rigid and stagnant in terms of, not stagnant, but you're allowed to evolve, which is exactly what we wanted. And so there's this cyclical process in developmental evaluation that you conceptualize the project, what's actually getting developed and why are you developing this? So that goes back to our framework of what we developed in terms of the reflection room. Designing an evaluation system. So what are the processes and strategies that are coming out of what you conceptualized? And in this evaluation, typically surveys are used, interviews, observations, typical evaluation methods. And then the idea is there's this rapid real-time testing. So you examine what's being developed, what results are coming out, and then what do you want to do about this? Is there any changes that need to happen? And so we did this developmental evaluation over time, starting in the pilot. And today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we did at the COVID-19 version. So as you know, I think we were in the middle of the arts-based version, and then the pandemic happened and everything was shut down, as you might imagine. Maybe similar things were happening to you. So in Ontario, where I am, there was the Ontario Health Central Region Long-Term Care Home Grief and Bereavement Working Group. That's a long title, but they led the COVID-19 response in long-term care homes in Ontario. And this group had realized that they needed more support for staff and residents and family caregivers. And so they approached the SE Research Center. They knew about, someone on that committee knew about the reflection room. And they formed a subcommittee to look at how the reflection room might support or address grief in long-term care homes. And so on this subcommittee, there was representatives from family councils, Residents Association, the SE Research Center, Ontario Health. And from our earlier evaluations, we knew that the reflection room increases comfort, talking about dying, death, and grief. And so this was an idea, could we pivot the focus primarily on pandemic-related grief so that it could help people name grief and acknowledge it, which can then perhaps lead to attending to it. And one thing this working group decided was that in the video, you saw these big room installations. So one thing that they knew was that wouldn't work in long-term care homes. There's really limited space, and things would have to be distilled down into its simplest form in order to be adaptable to the different settings, which you can see some indication here of how it was shrunk down and adapted. So what they came up with was a kit. We called this the reflection room kit, and it was really the most basic materials you need to set up a reflection room. And here you can see on the slide a list of the things that were included. So we boxed up, it's a pretty light box, and we sent out invitations through this working group of any long-term care homes that wanted a reflection room. It could be free of charge, and they could do whatever they wanted with it and keep it indefinitely. And we would mail them a kit. We couldn't go in to set it up because of COVID restrictions. And so people who worked at the homes would have to set it up. And so we needed to be very easy. So they were instructed to please set it up for at least 4 weeks so that we could do this short evaluation, and to please adapt it. It wasn't a controlled intervention. They could add different colors. They could set it up in wherever they felt it was right for them. They could add culturally relevant symbols. And the main thing that we wanted them to do was that there was an invitation to pause, reflect, and share, and that it remained unfacilitated so that people could really engage with the space as they wished, when they wished, on their own time, in their own way. So in evaluating this intervention or installation, we wanted to ultimately meet the needs of people in long-term care homes. They were, as we know, there was a lot of distress and burdens happening there during the pandemic. And so we wanted to evaluate it without causing a huge disruption or increasing the burden of any sort of staff and caregivers and residents. So we wanted it to be evaluation, but very aware of the constraints of the situation within the long-term care homes. So we collected reflection cards. We got copies of the reflection cards that were put up in the various reflection rooms. We left a survey in the reflection room, or asked the representatives to leave a survey. And there was a note saying, if you'd like to fill out a survey, please do. But it again was not required, and it was totally voluntary. And then we also gave a survey to the long-term care home representatives who set up the room, and also asked them for an interview. And again, this was voluntary if they had time to do so. So you can see that we did in fact get those different levels of data. And the homes, we ultimately had 51 homes. I think there's maybe over 600. I might be getting this wrong. I think there's 600 in Ontario. So we had 51 sign up who wanted a reflection room. 32 actually set up the reflection room, and 19 planned to, but had really ongoing challenges with staffing and outbreaks, which was just made it really challenging. But they still have the reflection room kits, and they may at this point have set them up. Although the evaluation ended last March, I believe. So we didn't track participants. We had no sort of sense of who was coming and going to the room, which was on purpose based on our design. But from the surveys that were left in the room, we have a little bit of the sense of who showed up and how they used the room. So we can see here that the majority of people who visited were healthcare providers. Although what's great about the reflection room is that residents and caregivers also attended. And in long-term care homes, there's often not interventions that's focused on the whole, all members of the community. So that's a unique factor of this. And we can see that most people who visited identify as women. And this sort of tracks with, we know who works in long-term care homes and also the gender of caregivers. In terms of how people reacted or interacted with the reflection room, we know that most people at least read cards, but only about half of the people wrote their own card or their own story. So what was great is the feedback from the long-term care home reps. We learned that the engaging with the reflection room setting up, it was feasible and it's adaptable. So the long-term care home reps figured out ways to set it up in an alcove, in a greenhouse, in a multi-purpose room, in a hallway, in many in chapels. And so there was this really ability for them to adapt it to the setting, and that it was really feasible. People said it took about anywhere from 20 to 60 minutes to set up. And then the maintenance of it is just popping in a few times a week to make sure there's blank reflection cards, pens, what have you. So it was great to hear that after all that focus on conceptualization of the basic kit, that was achieved in terms of something that was really easy to do. And then we looked at the content of the reflection cards themselves to give us a little bit of a sense of what is actually the grief experience that's related to the pandemic in these homes. And we used the dual process model, which some of you are probably familiar with, to help us make sense of this. So you can see here, people expressed overload from the pandemic, which makes sense, feeling overwhelmed, feeling distressed. Staff in particular had burnout, and many were fearful of COVID. We also saw loss-oriented concerns being described. So grieving deaths and illness, loss of meaningful activities. This will be very familiar to people struggling with loneliness. Adjustment-oriented concerns, as you would imagine. What is it going to be like? When can we ever return to normal? And how am I going to adapt to the new world? What we didn't expect was these more sort of positive reflections of what they learned through the loss that were shared in the cards. So the importance of time together, importance of carrying action, how we persevere together, and how we prioritize the important things in life. And then also gratitude. So lots of outpouring gratitude to the staff for care, for connections, and for being kept safe. So we asked the long-term care home reps if they believe the reflection room was helpful for coping with grief, to give us a sense what actually is happening here and what way might it be effective. And the vast majority said yes. The few that said no, it was mostly related to the fact that they had set it up in a place that wasn't visited. And I'll share some things that could help it be improved. But here you can see on the screen the things that they felt why it supported grief was offering this quiet, restful place, providing an outlet for thoughts and emotions. Some said that just having the reflection room evoked conversations about grief as a conversation starter, allowing people to reflect and process, and providing this additional support, just knowing that an extra support was there beyond the spiritual care or social work that was being offered. We also asked the people who filled out the surveys, would they recommend that other long-term care homes had a reflection room? Again, the vast majority said yes. The few that said no they felt it wasn't needed because for them, a chapel is a reflection room. And that was maybe reflected twice in different comments. And then one caregiver expressed concern about safety. So they felt that by offering people to process difficult emotions and thoughts might come up, and if it's unfacilitated, is that dangerous for the community? And here again, you can see very similar reasons why most people would say that they'd recommend it, because it was effective for supporting people who are grieving. But these residents and staff and caregivers also added that there was support in building connection. So through this sharing of stories, they knew they weren't alone, and that it supported well-being. Many people, I think 4 people wrote, it's good for the soul. And so there was something about just going into the reflection room that they felt like individuals in the community were supported in well-being. I should mention that the long-term care home staff, when they felt like they hadn't set it up in a way that was useful, they had recommended that there could be, as the pandemic was perhaps slowing down is the right word, they felt like maybe the topic wasn't quite what the community needed anymore, because we asked them to reflect on their experiences about the pandemic over the last 2 years. And so maybe a different invitation would have been helpful. There was also some reflections on how we might increase accessibility. So is it in the right place? And or for people who can't go there alone or can't write, are there ways that we can increase engagement? So could there be a traveling reflection room? Could there be an invitation to draw or to help somebody write their reflection card? And then even more community input was what was recommended. So could there be more residents and caregivers coming up to think about where should this go and what should the design be, and just more community engagement and even the setting up of the reflection room. So takeaways about the project that we learned was that supporting grief is having this unstructured arts-based initiative seems to offer something useful to communities who are experiencing loss. The sharing and receiving stories, it seems to be an important part of cultivating well-being. And particularly rest kept coming up. So having this place to rest, and without rest, it's challenging to reflect and process. And this is an important part of why the reflection room can support people who are grieving. And lastly, for this group, things that are important from my perspective of what works with these community engaged evaluations is when there are projects, making sure they're adaptable to the emergent needs of participants in the context, and making that a priority over adherence to a particular design or method. Balancing participant needs over evaluation methods, which I just mentioned, really including experts by experience early on and throughout. How are we meeting their needs? What more do they need from us? Is this working? What could be improved? And of course, lastly, using a theoretical framework to provide continuity as the project evolves. So you can see through the Reflection Room project, having that framework of the 3 ideas really grounded our work as we continue to evolve. So if you'd like more information about our research center, you can get in touch with us here. We have a website, we're on social media. I don't know if you use QR codes, but there's one. And then we also have a community list, and this is really sort of sending out, I think we send out maybe 2 newsletters a year about any projects that we might be recruiting for in terms of if anyone wants to participate in action-oriented research. So you're welcome to join there. It is on our website. You can find it there, or this QR code you can use to access that. So thank you so much. I'll stop sharing my screen, and I'd be love to have any questions you might have. Hi, Nina.
Hi, Celina. I just wanted to mention that I'm the chaplain also of a long-term care facility in Milton called Allendale. We participated in this project.
Wonderful.
And from the start of when we set this up, we now have our own reflection room, which we set up so that it can now work with all faith groups. And we put different faith groups, information in the room. We went and got some prayer mats from the local Muslim community, and we got some Jewish books and Hindu books and stuff, so that I want to thank you for what you did with that research project, because it really did help us get management involved to allow us to set up a reflection room.
That's wonderful to hear. And the allowing, I didn't mention this, but people really thought that allowing prayer in those rooms was important to many communities, and that people being really flexible about what reflecting looks like for different people was important, so that we don't be prescriptive about what reflecting and processing grief looks like. Yeah, that's wonderful. That's so nice to hear, because we, the project ends and then you lose touch, and yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you. Any other questions?
Celina, I just wanted to thank you very much for that fantastic presentation, and you did a wonderful job in the short time that you had. I just wanted to acknowledge that in one of your first slides, where you reference Paul Holyoke and Jesse Stevenson in their article from 2017, that Jesse is a member of this community of practice. And she gave a presentation in the spring, I believe, on some other quality improvement projects that they do at the Pearly Rideau Vets Hospital here. So that's kind of a cool sort of link to this as well. I
thought this group might appreciate the rooting in the spiritual care practices, the best practices. And in some ways, so the reflection room was created early on in the research, and the research on spiritual care best practices evolved. So there's actually, I think, now 8 best practices, which never really came back together in terms of continuing to influence the reflection room. But for those who are interested, the paper is interesting, and there are more best practices to consider.
So my last question is, you've probably published.
We've published only on the pilot phase. Yeah.
Is it something that we might be able to read?
Yes, it's open access, and it's in Omega, in the Journal of Death and Dying. So it's very accessible. And if I can share the slides. It should be in the references.
Oh, very good. Thank you.
A question. I don't know if you can hear me. Yeah. For the reflections, were there any reflections that seemed to be to be embedded with a lot of raw stuff, raw reflection amongst those who shared. How deep did they go? Or was there any way to note to see some of them going very deep, others, I mean, and sensing when reading the reflection that this was a real deep reflection?
Yeah, so in the first pilot, we found that people wrote letters. We divided it as letters, utterances, and stories. And so some people wrote really, and huge variation in terms of how emotional, how vulnerable people got. But a lot of it, yeah, like, letters to loved ones who you miss and what you miss about them, loneliness, vulnerability, a lot of these, but then also this, what have I learned from this experience? What are the joys and struggles of caregiving? I'm going back to the pilot version, but if I stick to the COVID-19 version, lots of, you saw some positive, but like some very lonely. I wish I had never come in here. I'm never going to see my family again. And I think by having it anonymous, so you didn't have to write your name.
Yeah.
And the reflection room's open all the time, so you can go. We heard some people saying, I could see some people poke their head in and then they're not ready. Then they come back, maybe they'll sit, maybe not quite ready, leave, and then they'll come back and actually write something. So it's really nice letting people really go and do the processing when they're ready, and then witnessing, reading others perhaps if you're not ready, and then saying, oh man, I feel like that too. Yeah, pretty special.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Linda.
Hello, my apologies for joining late, but the pieces that I was present for, just really inspiring presentation. I don't know if I'm echoing.
I think you're
Yeah.
on an Acer and a Linda, perhaps. Are you joined
Oh,
twice?
perhaps.
Or if we could mute Acer.
Yeah, I don't even know what Acer is. That is so bizarre. Okay.
I think, Karen, do you
Oh,
have ability to mute?
brilliant.
Oh, there you go.
Is that better? Okay. So yes, my apologies for joining late and for now causing a bit of chaos with Acer. I've never seen that before. Anyhow, your presentation that I caught was just really, really inspiring. And here at Canuck Place in the 2 hospices that we have, we actually don't have a designated sacred space. So the spiritual health practitioner on our team and I have been talking about potentially doing a pop-up space. And I'm loving the idea of incorporating something like this and just how movable it is. And your kit, I took a picture of what's included in the kit. So the wheels are turning, and just loved your presentation of the findings. And I just think it has so much potential. Really excited. And I'm curious, and my apologies if it's already been shared, but if I could have access to the article that people were referencing.
Yes. Perhaps I could send it.
Sure.
Maybe it could be shared with the group. So I don't know if I mentioned this, the St. Elizabeth Foundation, which is the charity foundation related to St. Elizabeth Healthcare, has now taken on the Reflection Room project, and they've shared it with all hospices. They sent out a kit to all hospices across Canada back in May of last year. And so it's possible that all hospices have it somewhere. And if you don't have it, you could reach out to the foundation and ask for another one. And I think they still have some funding because we got a grant to do that.
Did they send it to the pediatric hospices?
I was not in, they said there's over 220 hospices. So does that sound like it would be included in that? I don't know.
I would be surprised if it was sent and I wasn't aware of it.
Okay.
Do you know when it would have been sent?
I think it was for hospice month. Does that make sense? In May?
This year? Okay,
last year.
last year.
But I can also, if you'd like, so on one of the slides, there's a contact information for the foundation, and they're
Yes.
very responsive. So you
I
could,
would love if we could have a kit. That's
yeah, ask
very
for one.
generous.
It's very likely you will get one.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Right. I imagine we've run out of time. Oh,
Celina, just a quick question. My job is as spiritual care counselor at a hospice. I don't remember being sent a kit.
no.
No. This is Carpenter Hospice in Burlington.
I'll share the, so I'll share my slides, and there is the email for the
Okay,
foundation.
thank you.
You
Yeah.
can follow up, because they might have a particular person they sent it to,
Okay.
didn't know what to do with it, perhaps.
I'm the
Yeah.
only spiritual care counselor, so
Maybe they send it to the director, manager.
maybe.
I
Okay.
don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyways, I'll share the slides and the article, and please always feel free to reach out. I'm happy to answer any questions at a later date. Great.
Thank you for sharing your time with us, Celina. That was really interesting.
Good. My pleasure.
Thank you, Celina. Adriana, I don't know if you had any parting words or.
Yeah, thank you so much. I had the opportunity also to experience the reflection room last October at the Hospice and Palliative Care Conference here in Ontario, in Ottawa. St. Elizabeth was hosting the reflection room for all the attendees. So thank you so much for that experience and for honoring today with the presentation and walking us through the process of accompanying the experience of grief, especially throughout the pandemic.
Wonderful. Thank you. Very nice to meet
Thank
you
you.
all. Enjoy the rest of your meeting.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you. All right. So I have kind of an update to share with folks. I feel I can hear myself echoing. Well, maybe it's okay. So first of all, it's really good to see everybody here again, and nice turnout. And I think the recording will be great to put on the webpage. Yeah, and the slides and the article to share that. She's very generous. So I think everybody here today has been at previous meetings, so welcome back. And we have some good speakers lined up for the fall. I know the next one is in November. So the next item on the agenda is an update on what we have been talking about for some time, which is a proposed advanced certification in palliative and bereavement care within CASC. And I just want to give folks an update because there's been some, I guess, kind of shifting over the summer. So I'll do that now. I'll just take a few minutes. So we've had some conversations with various people over the summer to discuss the proposed advanced certification in palliative and bereavement care. And one of our most recent conversations was with Rochelle Blackwood. Sorry about that. So she helped us better clarify a path forward. And she was able to give us feedback that the idea that we had, which was to have a group of us go through the American advanced certification in palliative and hospice care and ask them if they could, kind of coach us through their process, but we would use Canadian kind of content and Canadian competencies. That idea is not going to happen. Unfortunately, she said it's not realistic to really ask them to do that at this time. And she just continued, she encouraged us just to continue on with our own kind of Canadian process. And we can still benefit from from the work that they've done, and we can build upon, all that they've done, and they've been very generous with sharing resources with us. So that's just a bit of a pivot, because up until this summer, I'd been sort of thinking, oh, well, let's kind of try this path, but so the path's taken a turn. So the path now would be to kind of have our own Canadian process and figure that out sort of step by step. And Rochelle also recommended that we as in this community of practice and the folks who are really proposing the advanced certification, we forge stronger ties with the Professional Practice Commission and Education